Hi, everyone, and good evening, good day, and good morning, depending on where you are in the world. I'm happy to have J.B.Rainsberger with me today, and we are going to have a short chat about deliberate practice and just a few words on how this came about. JB and I have been setting up a partnership between us, and as we were discussing, it felt like we have a lot of common ideas around how data practice should work, and that like we are just like-minded people, and it felt like a really lively conversation. So I thought it'd be nice to share it with others. So I would like to ask you, JB, to come on camera.
Hi,
Hi.
folks.
And maybe let's just give a bit of context for people who we are, the both of us, and I would suggest you start.
Absolutely. So, my name's J.B.Rainsberger. Some people know me as J Brains. I'm an old extreme programming dude. I got started in the late 90s when extreme programming was becoming popular. And so I was heavily influenced by the folks in that field. And so I pretty quickly understood at the beginning of my career as a programmer that programming was kind of I wouldn't say boring, but the relatively easy part. That once I sort of figured out how to write code in a way that seemed to feel like I wasn't just making mistakes everywhere, what really became interesting was what other people were struggling with. So I guess the teacher in me came out pretty quickly. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. So I, you know, have wandered Europe for 10 years, trying to help people work with less stress, trying to work especially with programmers. And that's usually how it works. I start by working with programmers on technical excellence kinds of issues. But when we sit down to try to write code together, it usually only takes about an hour. And then we start talking about people issues. We start talking about, that person over there is in the way, or they won't let us do it that way because of this weird policy that was adopted 2 years ago. And then pretty soon we're talking about people issues. And so that's what I really became interested in. Programming is the easy part. The fun part is what happens when people try to do it. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
It's really nice, and honestly, like there are a lot of things that resonate with me, and I had a somewhat similar path. Not exactly. For me, I actually started at the university. I was a mathematician by degree, and then after that, as I uh, got into the industry and started programming, like the teacher in me just very early on started to come out, and I really enjoyed teaching people. I guess that's part of the reason why I became a team leader very early. I think like 2 or 3 years into my career, I was already leading and managing teams. And basically, as I said, like teaching was very interesting for me always. And the minute I heard about code retreats, and I've been to a code retreat myself, I really felt like, oh, this is my calling. I want to run these kinds of events because it's so much fun, and I've been doing it for 10 years. Like in Budapest, I had my own meetup group, and we have been running code retreats every month, which is a fairly strong cadence. And that group had hundreds of people by the end. So that was something that I was really interested in. And then came continuous delivery. And for a while, that was kind of the hot topic of moving to continuous delivery by various teams and companies. And what I saw was people kind of dragging their feet, feeling scared, having to deploy that often, and because they had this experience of if we deploy then all things get horrible and it's going to be painful. So I wanted to create something that helps people with that, and that's how Lean Booker came about, this kind of code style event that helps people get on board with this. And of course, I also have this YouTube channel which we are doing the live on right now, and any of you viewers who might be watching, subscribe. It really helps with building the audience here. So, and getting out more messages about how to do agile well. So after the introductions, I just really wanted to reflect on deliberate practice, and one of the things that I feel like a lot of people ask is like, if we can do trainings, if we can go to conferences and listen to people talking about how to do things well, and we have on the job learning, like we are doing things, like what is this in between thing, this deliberate learning? What niche does it fill? Why is it important for us to do it?
Yeah, so this is something that has come out of my my other job. So I'm also a professional bowler. And so I have been reading a lot about sports psychology and trying to put coaching ideas, taking them from the technical arena, from the programming arena, and move them into sports. And that has led to a lot of reading about how people learn, as I'm desperately trying to find out how to improve for myself. And one of the things that came out of that, there are a number of books, The Talent Code, Talent is Overrated, that all push this idea of deliberate practice and a very specific kind of practice. This is all based on the 10,000 hour rule that I think a lot of people maybe have heard of, but have heard the very superficial misunderstanding of what the paper actually says. They just think, well, if I just practice something if I just repeat something for 10,000 hours, I'll master it. And that's not at all what it means. Deliberate practice is really a particular way of practicing that differs a lot from on-the-job training. Because in on-the-job training, you have tasks. Your number one goal is to complete those tasks. And whatever you happen to learn along the way is nice. And maybe if you're working in an environment where there's enough time or where somebody reminds you to, you can sit and reflect on what you did and how it went and find a couple of lessons. What tends to happen more often than anything else is that if there's any learning that happens in on-the-job training or on-the-job learning, it's accidental, and you really only notice things when they go horribly, horribly wrong, right? Because that's what you remember. Those are those war stories. That's what you tell people at meetups. Those are the things that go into your conference talks. Those are the lessons that really stay with you. And I don't think it has to be quite like that. Deliberate practice is really more of an exercise in picking something specific that you want to work on, planning for how you're going to do it, which really just means I'm going to use this activity, not because I want to complete the task, but because I want to practice a thing. And then one of the funniest things that I read in, I don't remember which one of those books it was the idea of stopping yourself the moment things go wrong. And that's one thing that's very different from on-the-job learning. When on-the-job learning, you're focusing on getting the task done, and whatever you learn is great. But in deliberate practice, the goal is not to complete the task. The goal is to stop when things start going wrong, try to figure out why that's happening, and then try again. And this, I remember in the early days of Code Retreat, this was what Code Retreat was aimed at. Let's create an environment where there's nothing but deliberate practice, where there's no pressure to complete the task, and that as soon as something goes wrong, everyone can stop and talk about what's happening and try again. And not only is that okay, but that's encouraged. Indeed, that's the point.
Yes. I remember that very clearly. That was always a very hard rule at Code Retreats, that your aim is not to finish. We even used to say that if you finish the task, if you get to the end of implementing Game of Life, you miss the point. Then that wasn't a good round, because a good round ends with you being halfway through, or even not even halfway through, and realizing that you learned something, that you got something valuable out of this exercise, right?
Yeah, some of the best sessions I had were ones where we didn't get a single test passing. Because we were so deep in arguing about an idea, or we were struggling so much to try to figure out how to do something that we thought should be possible, but because none of us had done it before. And, that I think that's something that the old me liked, the idea of, if you finish the task and you did it wrong. But I think the kinder, gentler me prefers to say, well, if you finish the task, that's okay. Start again. and try something a little harder, or try again and pay more attention to what you're doing, or try again and pay more attention to what other people are doing. That's one of the nice things about the way that Code Retreat is designed, is that there's nothing that stops you from just throwing everything away and starting again. You're going to do it at the end of 45 minutes anyway. There's no harm in doing it at the end of 15 minutes too.
Very, very good point. And by the way, I'm just gonna jump ahead a bit since we're already kind of at the topic, which is I was planning to ask about our best code retreat experiences, right? And it really kind of ties in what you just said. Mine was I think it was one of either the first or the second code retreat that I sat down with a friend of mine. He's called Atos. Haven't been speaking to him for a while. I should call him, but anyway, he and I, we met the first time, and we sat down for a session on a code retreat. And then the facilitator at the time told us that we are going to do silent pairing. So no speaking at all. And the two of us, not knowing each other, having very different backgrounds. He was already doing TD at the time. For me, that was the first day I ever did TDD.
Oh, nice.
So, and I had a very procedural style at the time. And he was already kind of functional. And we started doing this, and every time one of us did something, the other one was scratching their head and like had no idea what and we were just changing each other's code, and in the end it was a huge mess. It was incredibly terrible, like the first code ever. And the interesting part about that story is that in the end, a couple of years later, we ended up facilitating these code retreats for years together. Like he was the other facilitator, and we were kind of doing it together. And years later, we sat down again together for a silent pairing session. And what was really interesting is that converging style. Like at that point, when we sat down, we finished in, I think, 25 minutes, which was crazy fast, and it felt like complete flow. So yeah, that was an interesting story for me. But I'm curious, like for me, do you have one specific code retreat or legacy code retreat that was really memorable for you for some reason?
Well, not especially. And actually, before I get there, I really want to point out that your story illustrates perfectly part of the point of deliberate practice, that the pain and suffering that you might have felt when neither one of you could take a single step without the other one criticizing it silently, which probably made it a little bit easier. But the either the criticism or confusion, or in some people will in that situation would end up with a severe lack of confidence, feeling like they have no idea in which direction they're going.
Yeah.
But the convergence happens sooner. That part of what you get in exchange for investing all of this uncertainty up front is the breakthroughs happen sooner. The aha moments come sooner. And that's what allows you to then, the next time you get together, you notice a huge difference. So as far as the code retreats go, it was a little different for me only because, so first I attended the first code retreat. And that was actually a last moment decision for me. I wasn't sure I was going to go. And I literally was discussing it with my wife at the time, I think a week before it was scheduled, and said, I'm just going to spend the money and go. I wasn't even sure why I wanted to go. It's important to understand that at this point, I'd already spent nearly 10 years working as a trainer and mentor. And so a lot of the things that I assumed that I would learn at a code retreat, I'd already learned on my own. I'd already learned through being a member of the Extreme Programming Toronto user group, going to a bunch of conferences. It felt a little bit like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to get out of this code retreat thing because I've done all this before. I've done the silent pairing. I've done the ping pong pairing. I've been practicing TDD for nearly 10 years. Like what's really going to happen? And I thought, well, maybe I'll get some interesting ideas about how to teach, and that'll be it. And that's not a bad investment. If I get to see a bunch of people that I like in an environment where we can do more than just have a brief conversation at the bar, and if I pick up a few tricks on teaching, it'll be worth the money. It'll be worth the time invested. And that wasn't what I experienced at all.
Mm.
What I experienced more than anything else, I walked into this room and there were a whole bunch of people, some of whom were my peers, some of whom were the people that were my mentors, the people that I learned from directly, like Ron Jeffries and Chet Hendrickson, and I think Bill Wake was there. I don't even remember everyone who was there, but it was a star-studded group. In addition to a bunch of people who had never seen TDD before, who had no idea how to do incremental design, who were like you, who were walking into this for the very first time and didn't know what to expect. And what I remember about that experience more than anything else was the joy of just participating, of not being expected to be on stage, of not being expected to teach, of not being expected to lead. And so I got an opportunity to do both. I spent a few sessions having the experience that you described, where I didn't know what they were trying to do and I couldn't figure it out. And I just had to let that go and decide, I'm just going to follow it and see what happens. And I had some experiences where clearly I was the person who had the most experience out of the pair. So I would help out a little bit. And that for me was both a wonderful experience in just participating without feeling any pressure to perform. And so I got to learn things, but also, oh man, did it test teaching style. Because when you're pairing with somebody and the goal is deliberate practice, I had to spend an awful lot of time sitting on my hands and saying nothing and doing nothing and letting things happen. And that was not my style.
Yeah, that's very hard. I absolutely like when you really have that urge to just grab the keyboard and just fix it. Just go ahead.
Yeah.
But the other person is not going to learn that, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that was, that was the beginning of me not being interested merely in the technical excellence topics that I teach and have been teaching, but really in replacing teaching with learning, but focusing on the people learning rather than on how I'm going to teach. And that was the, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was sort of the beginning of my transformation away from merely standing at the front of the room and screaming facts at people for 3 days. I mean, I'll be frank. If any client wants me to do that, I'm happy to do that. But it's not really how learning tends to work. That's again where deliberate practice becomes really important. People need to struggle. People need to have incomplete information and try things anyway. People need to make mistakes and notice it, and maybe even have those things pointed out in a non-judgmental way. And that is what seems to accelerate their learning. If there's anything we've learned as a group in the last 25 years, it's that. And I didn't realize at the time that Code Retreat was the beginning of me transforming away from a lecturer to someone who facilitates learning. And that's really why something like Lean Poker is important to me, because I don't have the energy to create this stuff. Like, I don't have the energy to do this. I have my own little workshops. I can do those. But I'll be frank, a lot of companies just want to buy talking head at the front of the room, talk for 3 days, spread your pixie dust, and magic will happen. And sessions like Lean Poker, I think, really lend some credibility to the idea that learning doesn't happen that way, that learning needs to be more experiential, and the people need to be allowed to struggle, and they need to feel supported, but they don't need to be directed nearly as much as we tend to think they are.
Oh, I love what you're saying. Like, as I said, like we have a lot in common, right? And the one of the things that like inspired Lean Poker. I was doing these code retreats, and a lot of the times people would at the end you have the closing circle, right? When we ask people what did you learn, what surprised you, something like that. And there was one feedback that I kept hearing over and over and over again, which was, this is all beautiful in theory, but how am I going to do that at work? Because we are not finishing here. And that was like, on one hand, we are saying that deliberate practice is when your goal is not to finish. But at the same time, people were like coming away from code retreats with the mindset of, oh yeah, but we didn't finish anything. So how am I going to sell this to my company that I'm not going to finish things?
Right.
And that's kind of the reason why I created Lean Poker, because I wanted to have kind of a way of deliberate practice that shows people that doing the right things, like what the agile community preaches, it's not a theory. It's not something that you could do in theory, but in practice, that's not how it works, because you have quarterly goals and all that. But instead, I wanted to show people that if you want to really seriously react to your customers' needs, what you really need to do is to iterate quickly. You need to kind of do the right things as per the book of agile, instead of just hacking things together. And I think it really achieves that, because a lot of the time people just intuitively start to understand, and that's what I like about it. Like, I really don't have to speak that much, because people just intuitively understand what to do in order to get ahead of the rest of the team.
And I think one of the things that, so yes, and I really like the idea of balancing, creating an environment where there's space to do deliberate practice, but where there is still a goal. I mean, I went to a number of conferences where there were, there was a coding studio going on during the entire conference. You could drop in when you had a free moment. There's probably someone you could pair with. You could sort of work on something for a little while. And I found that pleasant enough. But one of the things that was kind of missing from it was some kind of concrete goal. I mean, yeah, you could pull tasks down from the task board and ask someone if they want to work on it. But one of the criticisms of those activities was that you essentially had a bunch of people who had something they wanted to practice, chose to practice it, didn't really care whether they were making progress towards completing any tasks, finishing any features. Hey, let's do some refactoring here. Let's clean things up. There was no sort of, there was no overall goal that was leading people to try to finish things. And so what that ended up with was a wonderful environment of deliberate practice that lacked that feeling of, I achieved something. And, we can only do it so much. We can only tell people so much that what you did was the point. You got to work on something that you never take the time to work on. You got to practice a refactoring that you wouldn't dare spend an hour practicing on at work because your boss is yelling over your shoulder to finish things. You took the time to practice in a way that you ordinarily wouldn't do. But we still have this nagging feeling in the back of our mind that somebody's telling us we have to finish things. Okay, fine. So let's give them something to work towards where there's a little bit of artificial urgency. And I think what's wonderful about this is something that I never felt with Code Retreat. I never felt with my own training, because it was never my goal to create it. An artificial sense of urgency that's just enough that gives people a feeling like my decisions are important. And so I think it provides a nice balance between deliberate practice and, let's call it, an industrial strength environment. Not because I think an industrial strength environment is the best place to learn, but I think that, it seems to me that having that bit of artificial urgency is a nice thing to alternate with this, deliberate practice studio, nobody's going to care how quickly you go kind of feeling. That I think if you have a little bit, I think maybe we had the pendulum swing too much in the other direction, and we created a little bit, maybe we did too good a job at creating environments where people can just polish the stone until it's perfect.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, I heard the same things. I heard people saying, yeah, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this. Even though my answer to that question was always, right, you don't know what you're going to do with this, except that in the next month or so, you're going to try to do something. You're not going to be sure if it's going to work. You're going to take something that you learned from today. It's going to make what you do easier, and you're not even going to notice it happened. And that's the dirty secret of deliberate practice, is that, Improvement is not linear. It's not predictable. It's not gradual. It happens in quantum leaps. You never know when it's going to happen, and it's hard to notice because you don't notice when things go right. You tend to notice when things go wrong. And one of the things about learning is that, these things you just like, oh, I did this refactoring, and instead of struggling for 10 minutes, I did it in 30 seconds and it was easy. It's hard to notice that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that makes learning this stuff hard.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that there was only one time when I realized something like that. I actually had one class. We had one class. It was actually some kind of I don't even remember. Anyway, it was kind of a mess of a class. It ended up being a gut class with hundreds of methods, and we just didn't know how to refactor it. It was like impossible to get it done. And we tried like 3 times over 2 years. And every time we had to revert the whole refactory. And then a couple of months later, we kind of had this goal in mind that we are going to like refactor until it becomes easy to get rid of that class. And it was so rewarding when after, I don't know, 3 years of trying to get rid of that class, we got rid of it in 45 minutes.
Yeah,
that was the point where we were set up enough and we have been thinking enough about it that we could get rid of it. And I think that kind of ties into what you're saying is that you don't always know when things are going to happen with learning and with preparing things like that. You kind of have a goal, a nebulous goal that you're working towards, but you don't know if it's going to happen tomorrow or in.
Well, and I bet you can't go back over the 3 years leading up to that point and say, well, this is when I learned the thing that made that part easy. And then this is when I learned the thing that made that part easy. And this is when I learned the thing, these 4 things together allowed me to see that that was going to be possible. And I think that, programmers in particular, especially younger programmers, have this idea that they can read their way to proficiency, and then they can have this orderly way of learning things, and then they'll be able to apply that learning right away. And so there's always this expectation, just like you described it in the feedback that you got in the closing circle. Like, how am I going to use this? I don't know. I just know you're going to use it. It's going to be integrated somehow into your work if you allow that to happen. But we are so conditioned to expect to learn in an orderly way. I read a book, an idea clicks, I see how to apply it, I apply it, it goes smoothly, things are faster, and then I can demonstrate improvement to whoever's looking, the boss, the team lead, whoever it is. And that is simply not how learning works. Not for most people most of the time. You gather information like so many berries from the garden, and eventually you reach for an idea and it's there and you don't know why it's there. It's there because you read it 3 years before. It's there because you went to a code retreat 4 years earlier. You're never going to know how to use this stuff until you just magically reach for it and it's there.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of why all of these aspects are important, right? You do need to have those conference talks or at least watch it on YouTube, right?
Yes.
You do need to learn from books. You do need to do on-the-job learning, but like all of the things work together, and deliberate practice is kind of the thing that ties it all together for me.
Well, I think the deliberate practice, what it does more than anything else, is when you've identified a particular skill that you want to cultivate, something that's hard for you, something that you don't understand yet, deliberate practice gives you a path to cultivate that skill sooner. It doesn't necessarily help you make connections between ideas, but it provides, it's just like, when you learn to speak a language that you didn't learn from birth, you don't just read grammar books and you don't just read dictionaries. You need both. You need to gather some vocabulary and you need to gather some grammar rules. And it's never orderly. You just sort of, you learn some vocabulary one day, you learn some grammar another day, you try it out, and at some point with lots of practice, it clicks. That's kind of what deliberate practice is more the vocabulary part. It's once I identify a thing that I need to be able to do better, let me just repeat it until it feels easy. And once it starts to feel easy, then I can move on. And programmers, for whatever reason, it's been, nearly 25 years of screaming about this, and programmers still tell themselves that they're not allowed to do it. It's changing, but very gradually.
Yeah, and that's kind of the next question I wanted to drive towards. But before we talk about that question, I just wanted to call it out that we are at around halftime, and I would really like to give the opportunity for our viewers to ask questions. And we have a Slido right down in the description. If you go down there, you will find a link to Slido where you can post your questions and vote on questions. We are going to spend the next 10-15 minutes still talking about our own topics. But if we see questions in the Slido, we are going to get to that. But let's return to what you just said around, just finding the time for deliberate practice. And that is something that I also struggle with a bit, because very often I hear this, okay, but when do we do that? How do we make time for that? And especially now, like I've been talking to a couple of people recently, and it seems like that now that we have this economic downturn, companies are even less willing to let people learn and let people go to conferences because it's expensive, and especially they don't really want people to go to a conference and then do a workshop as well. So yeah, how do we find the time for these things if it's important?
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it kind of frames. I have my typical answer. I'll do a short version of it in a moment. But one of the things that I really appreciate you for mentioning is the idea that because it's expensive to go to conferences, I think what's good about that is that it opens people up to alternative ways of learning and learning different things. And it's very hard to know, just looking at your own learning, that now is not the time to go to a conference. Now is not the time to be flooded by 12 new ideas. Now is the time to find the one or two things that you haven't taken the time to practice and practice them. This goes back to the comment I made earlier about programmers seem to want to read their way to proficiency, or watch YouTube videos, or go to conferences, and they just sort of expect that if they allow information to wash over them, they'll somehow figure out how to activate all that learning and benefit from it. And again, in the stuff that I've been reading over the last 5 years, especially about how people learn, that's not enough. That is an ingredient. But I think in the software world, we have a tendency to overindulge in information and don't give ourselves enough opportunity to activate the information that we're getting. And so it happens accidentally. And things like Code Retreat, like Lean Poker, or even the thing that I'm going to talk about, which I call casino technique, what they allow us to do is to actually activate that learning. They allow us to, and that really boils down to some form of deliberate practice of trying it, not being sure if it's going to work, not worrying about whether you're going to finish the task, and stopping when you make a mistake and trying again, stopping when it feels weird and asking a question. So now the big question always becomes, sure, JB, but when? When am I supposed to do that? We're already being told to do less, or to do more with less, blah, blah, blah. And this is sort of the moment in the training class where I kind of have to look. It's better if I'm actually literally in the room with them. I can sort of look around the room and say, okay, are there any managers listening? Because let's make sure they can't, then if there's at least one manager in the room, then they'll play like putting their fingers in their ears, like, oh, it's okay, I can't hear you. Because the honest answer, part of the answer comes from, well, I should preface this by saying the answer is not comfortable. It's uncomfortable, and it's still true. And the uncomfortable truth is you actually have lots of slack. You have all the slack you need to practice deliberately. You have all the slack you need to use your day job tasks as fuel for learning. but it's not socially acceptable to show everyone how much slack you have, because we're supposed to be as efficient as possible and we're supposed to do more with less and all this kind of stuff. And so often what ends up happening is either that all this stuff is driven into the shadows, and I'll talk about how to do that in a moment, or there's one heroic person, a team lead, a technical lead, a manager, who can shield the group from outside view, which will allow them an opportunity to practice deliberately, openly within their group, but out of the way of observers who are standing there with their arms crossed, tapping their foot, impatiently waiting for results. So, and that's not to say that when we do this stuff, we're taking advantage of our employer or we're stealing their money. This isn't, reverse wage theft. What this is investing our time more wisely and more deliberately, admitting that learning on the job is accidental, unpredictable, and ultimately not as effective as deliberate practice would be. So, okay, how do you actually do it? First is to make peace with the fact that you have slack. You know you have slack because if you make a mistake and the company doesn't implode, that means you had slack. Perfect. Okay, now that we agree that you have slack, how do you use it? And I call it casino technique. And the idea of casino technique comes from this metaphor of if you go with your friends to the casino, then as you are walking towards the casino door, as you're about 100 meters away, you take out your wallet, you take out 200 euro, you hand your wallet to your friend, and then you say to your friend, look at me in the eye. No matter what I do, no matter what I say, no matter how much I scream, do not let me have that wallet. This is my gambling money. I'm going to walk into the casino, and when this gambling money is gone, I stop gambling. Do not let me have access to my credit cards. Don't even let me have access to my phone. I don't want to be tempted. This is as much as I'm willing to lose. And when I'm done, whether that's in 30 minutes or 8 hours, then my night is over. And then as you walk out of the casino, once you're 100 meters away from the door, then it's safe to take your wallet back. And that's just a funny way of saying, start with, what is an amount of time that I'm willing to waste, lose, get nothing from? Not because your intention is to get nothing from it, but because that freedom is necessary for learning to happen, for deliberate practice to happen. That's the code retreat model, right? The code retreat model is you have 45 minutes to waste, go waste it. Except, of course, you're not going to waste it. You're going to practice something in particular. You might learn one thing. You might learn 3 things you don't know. All you know is that at the end of 45 minutes, if it's not going well, you never have to speak about it again. And this is what I encourage people to do. Start with 30 minutes at the end of every task or at the beginning of every task. If you have a task that takes 3 days, I don't think your manager is going to scream at you if it takes 3 days and 30 minutes. That's an example of the slack that I mentioned, right? And so you start with 30 minutes. So maybe at 30 minutes at the beginning of every task where you try to do something new and see if it helps you. And if you're struggling at the end of 30 minutes, you just say, oops, I guess that didn't work. Let me throw that all away. And now I'll finish this task the old way, the way that I already know how to do. And at least I spent 30 minutes trying. Another way to do it is add 30 minutes at the end of the task. Try refactoring, try cleaning up before moving on, try writing an extra test, something that you can practice that you know is going to help you or that you think is going to help you. And again, at the end of 30 minutes, like you've already finished your task, at the end of 30 minutes, then you can make this simple decision. Do I keep the things that I did or throw them away? If I throw them away, that's okay. I'll be better prepared next time. And start with 30 minutes and wait for angry emails. Wait for that unexpected one-on-one meeting with your manager. Wait for that look on people's faces like they're wondering why it's taking you so long, and those probably won't happen. And if a few weeks go by and 30 minutes at the end of every task is okay, then try an hour. And wait for angry emails and wait for that one-on-one meeting with your manager to show up on your calendar. Wait for people to complain that you're going too slow. And they probably won't. So give that another month or so, and then try 2 hours, and just keep doubling it until it starts to become uncomfortable. Now, the worst thing that happens is somebody says you're going too slow, and you've seen your limit. But what tends to happen much more likely is those little practice sessions start to pay for themselves. You start to notice that you can get more and more done in 30 minutes. You try to do something for an hour and you notice you finish it in 48 minutes. Woo, I'm getting better. Not only are you actually using the time well, but you're getting feedback that you're improving. That gives you confidence to do other things. You can spend that 12 minutes resting. You can spend that 12 minutes trying something else, or you can give that 12 minutes back to your group. You decide. But the important thing is to recognize that there is slack here, and we can either make use of it, or we can just all pretend it's not there. I would rather make use of it. And I am still waiting for the first angry email from someone. I've been advising this now for 15 years. I still haven't received the angry email from somebody that says, you caused me to lose my job.
And probably you didn't also get any angry emails accusing of you making their employees slack off.
I still haven't heard it yet, but I have had a lot of very uncomfortable programmers look at me before they try it and say, I don't like this. I've even had several programmers before they try it tell me that I am doing something immoral. And I'm sorry, I just don't agree. If there's free money in the calculations, we can either find it and use it, or we can just all pretend that we don't know it's there.
Yeah.
Which one do you think is less moral? I'll let you decide.
Yeah. You know, the funny thing is that I just advertised the Slido, and the first question that we have here is, can you, J.B.Rains, talk about the casino techniques? So I guess check. No.
I read minds.
But I also want to like just call out how on brand the casino technique is with lean poker.
Yeah. Yeah, that was completely accidental. I've been calling it casino. I tried to come up with some simple way to come up with a metaphor, because it's a theory of constraints idea, right? It's recognizing that when you're not the bottleneck, your production rate doesn't have to be maximized. You don't need to maximize your production rate if you're not the bottleneck. If you are the bottleneck, this is a way to find out. You will actually you'll encounter a problem the first time you try to do it. You'll encounter a real problem where people are screaming, and then you say, oop, okay, fine, things happen. This is how I discovered I'm a bottleneck. But what most people discover is they're not a bottleneck, which means that they don't need to maximize their production rate, which means they, by definition, they have excess capacity. They can use it for deliberate practice. You don't have to give all your excess capacity back to your boss. You don't have to give all your excess capacity back to the company. You can use it any way you want. But actually, you're still giving it back to the company, right? Because your practice is going to own exactly. Yeah. I when I first started doing this, like I remember when I was still working at IBM early in my career, and there were days that I hung out on the Yahoo groups for like 6 hours. And there were moments where I felt bad about that. But I realized, look, my employer is benefiting from this too. It's not just me. It's impossible for me to learn things and not donate that back to the group, not donate to the people I work with, not donate it back to the project. Yeah. I mean, it's not like I'm going to learn something and then intentionally do the wrong thing just to spite my employer, no matter how much I felt like I might want to do that. No, almost. And you know what? If you want to do it, you cannot do it. So yeah, you have to work harder to do it than not do it. And even if you did it, they would deserve it. There's something about the system. And I don't mean to say the employer would deserve it, but I'm more like the system is designed, it gets what it's designed for. And if the system is designed to make you want to do that, you were going to do it one way or the other. There's not that much difference between hanging out on a Yahoo group for 6 hours and engaging in conversations and learning about things, or just scrolling Facebook for 6 hours. You're going to do one or the other. Yeah. Yeah. Any amount of learning you do is probably going to be beneficial whether you want it to be or not. Yeah.
By the way, just a different way to look at the casino technique that might be more investor friendly is if you think about how you start a startup, you usually are not going to have complete certainty if an idea is going to work. You're just going to limit your losses. You say, okay, this is how much I'm going to invest into this company at the first investment round and the second. And you're limiting your investment and then seeing what you learn from that, right?
Right. And recognizing early on that early investments are going to be about learning and you don't know what you're going to learn. How many stories have you heard of startups that said, this wasn't the company I thought I was building? Well, that's because of something they learned during the initial stages of their investment.
Never is the company that you started out building, is it?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Oh, I thought we were doing this. And then somebody discovered that that little tiny bit of the idea is actually the thing the market cares about.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're going for here. That's the same thing that we talked about 10 minutes ago about you never know when you're going to activate the things that you've learned. But if you don't take time to learn it, there's nothing to activate. And if you don't allow yourself the freedom to experiment, you'll never accidentally find the thing that the market all of a sudden says, ooh, that's the thing we want to buy. Really? That's what you want to buy? Okay. But you can't do that if you follow your plan too closely.
Exactly. All right. So I do want to move on to the next question from the Slido.
Perfect.
And it's kind of the obvious question to me, which is, what is Limp Poker again? So let me just give a very quick run through of what Limp Poker is, and then maybe you can reflect on what I said. But basically, the idea with Limp Poker is that I want to create an environment when people can practice incremental delivery and practice how I can actually deliver small pieces of code, push it into production, and then react to what happens. And the way we do this is that we get together, we form teams, and each team is going to be a kind of a startup on its own, right? And each of these startups are trying to build a poker bot that is trying to play poker throughout the day. And these bots are actually playing even right after the teams are formed. So no one has even checked out their code. There is a starter bot that does something very simple. No one even touched their code yet, but these bots are already playing, and they are playing every few seconds. So what ends up happening is all these teams go, oh, now we have to quickly do something because we need to get ahead of the other teams. So what is the smallest thing that I can do? And if you're going to, actually, there is going to be a Limp Poker event next week. If you go to limppoker.org/event, you will find the sign up button there. So one tip, if you go to Limp Poker, try and get something out in the first 30 seconds. This sounds aggressive, right? 30 seconds right after you checked out of the code, you're going to deploy something. And this is a challenge for you. Can you do that? Can you build something in 30 seconds that actually starts beating the other bots? And hint, it is possible. So, and the whole day is about that, right? You are going to try and get more and more of these iterations out and get feedback on it, and get like see how the bots are playing, figuring out where you lost money, where you gain money. What is it that you're doing well? What is it you're not doing well? How am I going to deploy a new version? Should I deploy it and then just wait? Should I look at the results? Should I do an A/B test? All these questions are just happening there. And after the 8 hours, like, one thing I can promise to anyone who is coming to Limp Poker, you are going to be tired as hell. Like, every single time we organize Limp Poker and I ask people, do you want to go out for drinks after this one? Everyone is like, are you kidding me? No way.
That's why I think it's very wise that we're doing this as 2 half-day sessions instead of one full day, because I think probably by the middle of the afternoon I'd be taking a nap.
Yeah, that might be a good point. Although at the same time, from practice, I know we have done this once already in 5 1-hour sessions instead of a single day. And it was really hard to just not touch the code, and all those context switches are also like it has a break. But let's see how the 2.5 days works. So that's the answer to the question around what is Lean Poker. I hope I could answer it well enough. And we still have 10 minutes. So if you have questions, down in the description, there is a link for the Slido.
Yeah.
But
and I'd like to add what I really like about, make sure everybody understands I've not participated in Lean Poker yet. I know about it. I understand the idea. I can match it to sort of my previous experiences with Code Retreat and Legacy Code Retreat, but I've not done this yet. And what I really like about this, what I'm looking forward to, is, there are a lot of things that we teach, incremental design, evolutionary design, continuous delivery, that our clients tend to see them as luxuries instead of necessities, even though in many environments, they are actually not luxuries. They are really things that they do need to learn, which is why I'm in the building in the first place. The reason why they're talking to me at all is because somebody somewhere recognizes that this is not merely a luxury anymore, that we really are experiencing this kind of competitive pressure, that we really are at the point where we can't change anything anymore, and yet we need to add features. And when we're talking about such huge scales, weeks, months of planning to deliver a release of the product or something, that we can get into a whole bunch of arguments about which techniques are useful, which ones aren't. Programmers are very good at arguing about things before they try them, and need to be pushed to just try them and see what happens. And what I really am looking forward to is the way that Lean Poker makes these things immediate necessities. Or even if they're not necessities, the competitive advantage is obvious. Anyone who understands, what you just described about how you start with Lean Poker can get it, that the first team to do something other than the default behavior of all the poker playing bots is going to have a huge competitive advantage. And it's tangible. You can see it, you can feel it, you know that it's there. All the things that you try to do, like, hey, should we write some tests? Hey, should we refactor? Hey, should we clean up before moving on? Hey, should we push this to production and then refactor a bit more and push again? These are no longer idle speculation. You can actually try to answer the question, was this useful or not? Because you'll know in 10 minutes whether it was useful or not. When you see the graph going up instead of down, that's all the feedback you need.
Exactly. And to be fair, like, people would think that like in a day you can't make a huge mess. You can. Like I have seen, like, there are two kinds of teams that end up losing at Lean Pokers very often. One thing is that tries to do everything cleanly, like when you are actually doing too much TDD in a sense. And the other kind of team that loses, that does no TDD and does not focus on code quality. And the reason is, like, you have to find a balance, and that's the thing that I really enjoy about Lean Poker, is this balancing act between where do I do things the right way, and where are the things where actually the right way is to cut corners.
This technical debt thing, the actual technical debt, the idea that when we implement or when we release features incrementally, by definition, we're not going to design it the way we want to from the beginning, because we can't predict the future. And then we have to pay down that debt over time, right? Not just, we cut corners, but more like, this is what it means to deliver incrementally. To deliver incrementally means that sometimes it makes more sense to do this instead of what's good in the long term. And to make that a deliberate choice.
Exactly.
And that's what I'm really interested in. Like, the context that we tend to work in is one where there's all this emotional and organizational baggage that stops us from doing the right thing, from doing the thing that we want to practice, that we want to get better at. And we haven't been writing tests. We haven't been refactoring. We haven't been cultivating the design. We haven't allowed ourselves to change the code just because it would be better. And one of the downsides to the training courses is we create this artificial environment where you can do all those things, but then you lose the urgency of shipping features. And I think that what I'm really looking forward to is the idea that Lean Poker is going to give us a glimpse of the future. Like, this is how we could actually work. Where, as you say, we do need to balance polishing the stone with getting something out. We do need to accept some, suboptimal design because, well, we need to get it out in production. Then we can clean up before moving on. Or we can make a conscious decision whether to clean up before moving on, instead of what we're doing now, which is everyone looking at each other saying, geez, I wish we could have done a better job. Oh, well.
Yeah. So we actually almost at time. We have 4 more minutes. And I really did want to get to one last question before we leave this off, because before we actually started talking together, I knew about Legacy Code Retreat and I knew about your involvement, but I kind of missed, are you the one who came up with it or not? So I just wanted to ask you about this story, if you still have time.
Absolutely. So here's how I recall it, and the other people involved will probably have different versions of it. But I remember after I went to the first code retreat, which I think was maybe in 2009, winter 2008, 2009. I think we were at the Agile 2009 conference. We had been talking about Code Retreat for a while. Corey Haynes and I knew each other for years. I knew what he was planning. He had told me a little bit about it. I liked the idea. Everybody was doing Code Retreats. And then the next obvious question was, well, what else can we do with this format that would be helpful? And I ended up in some conversations with people about, like, do we do an acceptance testing retreat? Do we do a refactoring retreat? Like, what other activities could we do in this format? And we ended up talking about refactoring retreat. This idea just sort of vaguely came to our head. We didn't know what to do with it. And then Pat Welsh and I were at Agile 2009 together. We ended up talking about this. And we sort of sketched out the idea of what a refactoring retreat would look like. And we kept trying to make it work. And it didn't quite fit until one of us, and I genuinely don't know which one, said, well, this is not a refactoring retreat anymore. This is a legacy code retreat. Aha. And then we both knew that there was a code base that we had been using for training years before, where, he essentially asked Chet Hendrickson to write a bad version of his sample project. He said, write it as though a COBOL programmer were writing in Java. Actually, C#, I think. Write it as though a COBOL programmer were writing C#. And Chet, having actually worked during that period, could channel his inner COBOL programmer. So he wrote a version of this trivia game code base as though a COBOL programmer were writing C#. And then we tried to use it for legacy code training. We used it in this legacy code retreat. And then, boom, we had a Java version. And then we had a Ruby version. And that became the code base. So we played around with the idea over the following few years. And then I ended up kind of turning it into, it became the backbone of my training course, Surviving Legacy Code. So Legacy Code Retreat was like the community version. You could get people together for a day and play in this code base, and here are some ideas of how to get started. But then I added some more formal training. Try this, try this, try this. And when I typically do that course with a client, we'll spend one day practicing in our fun little code base, and then another day trying to do the work in their code bases and see what happens. And so I ended up with this nice sort of freemium system where for community events, we can just do Legacy Code Retreat. And if you want to do training, then Legacy Code Retreat sort of is the beginning of that training. So we get a little bit of both. So I'm not going to claim ownership of Legacy Code Retreat, but as far as I know, I was there when it started, and I just happened to be one of the people who was doing a bunch of them in the first few years.
Yeah, I think I first heard about it from your blog or something.
Right. And so, yeah, that was how it started. And I think that, sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on things here. As far as I know, like legacy code retreats, as far as I know, might still be happening. There are a handful of people like Adi Balboake in Bucharest sort of ran with that for a while and did a bunch of those himself. I think Eric Talboom also in the Netherlands or Belgium.
I've been also doing a bunch of them.
Okay, right. So I know that some people have taken Legacy Code Retreat and sort of made it their own. And that was what I wanted from the beginning. I didn't want to own it. I didn't want to control it. I just wanted to, I use it in a particular way. I hope other people use it in a particular way. And even if it's not something that I hear about anymore, I get the sense that it's still continuing in some form out there. And I'm really like seeing something like Lean Poker or any of these other kinds of events, which seem like just obvious evolutions of the idea. Why wouldn't you want to do that next? You know, you can call this continuous delivery retreat if you want.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And by the way, with Lean Poker, my plan is absolute to give opportunity to others to also run their own Lean Pokers. Thank you, JB. I know you need to jump. And thanks for spending this hour with us. And yeah, bye. And I will just give a few updates while I let you go. So we are going to have, bye. We are going to have a Lean Poker event next week on the 23rd and 24th of November in the afternoon from 1:30 to 5 p.m. Central European Time. So if any of you want to join that, you have registration at leanpoker.org/event. I'm going to leave a comment after this below the video. But again, it's leanpoker.org/event. This comes with the ticket price, but for those of you who have been recently laid off, I really want to kind of help the community, especially those people who might be looking for jobs right now. So I'm going to give 3 tickets away free. If you're one of those people who recently lost their jobs, just write me a message and I will let you know how to get hold of that ticket. And other than that, I just want to ask you to like, subscribe, comment, press all the buttons, and see you next time. Bye.